What's up, legends, and welcome to what will probably be my last video on the Unmatched Summer of Legends tournament. This whole event concluded this past weekend with the semifinals and finals being streamed. I hope you guys tuned into that because it was a lot of fun to be a part of, and it was really cool to watch. The commentators, the production, it was all excellent. And of course, the games were cool too. So, as many of you may know, I qualified for the top 8 of this tournament, which was like the championship bracket. I actually finished second out of the 64 people that participated for the first 6 rounds. So I was seeded second out of the top 8 finishers, which was a pretty big achievement. And because of that, I will be talking about myself pretty favorably during this video, but I just want to remind everyone that I'm a pretty modest and humble person, and I don't want to come off as cocky at all or like I'm bragging, but I am pretty proud of how I did, and I'm going to try to hype myself up a little bit this video, so just keep that in mind that I'm grounded in my achievements. So the first question I want to ask is, how did I get here? What did I do during this tournament that led me to be so successful, to finish very high during the normal rounds and even reach the upper echelon of the championship bracket? Spoiler alert, because I guess I'll say this now. So if you don't want to know the results because you didn't watch the stream, maybe click away from the video. But I finished tied for 3rd place, so I lost in the semifinal, and I want to talk about like what was my journey to reaching the podium, essentially. And I know I've uploaded the first 5 rounds to YouTube. The 6th round was when me and Sojourne, who were both 5-0 at the time, we were the last 2 undefeated people, and we met in round 6 to determine basically who was going to go 6-0 and finish the first round in first place. And that game was, as commentator Frank would refer to it as several times during the weekend, that was more of an exhibition match where we played as less competitive players. I picked Spike first, so that match was streamed by Sojourne, and it'll probably be up in a VOD on his Twitch channel. And so I'm not going to upload it or talk about it really because it's not really that serious, and you can just go watch it if it's available. If it is, there'll be a link in the description as always. So before that, during the first 5 rounds where it was much more competitive, what did I do that led me to the success where I am now? So the first thing I want to talk about is Zero Skater gave me the nickname The Thief in my post-match interview, and I'm not sure if he was constantly referring to me as that during the match, but I guess I garnered somewhat of a reputation for stealing my opponent's favorite fighters. I know against TDC Jason, I took his Dracula. Against Josh Tan, when we met in the regular rounds, I took his Dracula again, and against Bug Hunter, I took his Little Red. So basically what happened was I would scout my opponents, I would look at the big spreadsheet with everyone's data, and I would find out what they like to play. This is good for several reasons. I guess it lets me prepare for what fighters I think they're going to pick in the match, and I can kind of counter pick them ahead of time by like prepping some counter picks, but I can also just pick whatever they want to play so that they're forced into the more uncomfortable position of playing someone maybe they're not as familiar with or not as confident in. And this strategy was relatively easy to execute because I was leader in a majority of my matchups, and being leader means you get to pick before your opponent, obviously, because you get the first pick, but basically every pick you make, your opponent responds to, which gives you the opportunity to, of course, grab 2 of the big 3 before they can, or you can just pick things before they can simply because you're going first. So this happened against Bug, where he actually gave me leader, so I just took Little Red right away so that he never even had the opportunity to pick her. So I was follower twice during this whole tournament. I actually only lost as leader. My record was also 6-2, but the 2 matches I lost were as the leader. But being leader pretty frequently let me execute my theft a little bit easier, because as follower, your opponent will get more chances to pick their favorite fighters before you. The other reason I think I was pretty successful was fighter diversity. During the entire first, I guess I'm going to refer to the first 6 rounds as, I guess, the regular season of the tournament, and the top 8 as the playoffs. So during the regular season, I picked 12 different heroes, which is actually a lot considering there's 19 heroes currently to pick from, and there are certainly some less desirable heroes in there. So picking 12 is actually a pretty high number. And I played as 11 of them because one of my picks, Jekyll and Hyde, got banned, and I only picked him once, so I never got a chance to play as him. And I actually won with 10 different heroes. Spike was one of the few heroes that I picked and did not get a win with. So obviously one of my strengths was being comfortable and flexible enough to pick a wide range of heroes and still perform well, even though I was picking so many. I know there are people like TDC Jason who basically only pick 5 or 6 people, but they're just so good with them that that's fine. And for me, I think counterpicking and stealing obviously led me to pick a little bit more diverse heroes, but just being comfortable with enough and was pretty good for me because it means I can counterpick more easily because I'm, I guess, more adept to picking a wide range of fighters. And it also means it's harder for my opponents to scout me like I scout them, because I don't really play the same people every match, and my opponents, if they want to scout me to try to counter steal before, like my favorite fighter, they can't really do that because they don't really know what I'm going to play, because I can play a lot of different things and I don't really play the same people that often. I think Medusa, Sinbad, Dracula, Bigfoot, Sherlock are probably my most common picks, but I can go well beyond that. You'll see this might actually be my downfall. Spoiler alert, it ends up being my downfall because while I pick and play as a large variety of heroes, it's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none thing, where I may not be particularly excellent with any of them. They might just be good enough. So those, I think, were the 2 keys for why I was so successful in the regular season. So now I want to give match summaries and my thoughts on how my top 8 rounds went. So my quarterfinal match was against Pommedepin. I'm just going to call him Pom. We had a lot of fun in our match. And Pom is actually a relatively new player. He picked up Unmatched about a week before the tournament started. So the fact that he was able to top 8 for this tournament, I think, is just so impressive in its own right. But Pom's weakness is that he really only played as 2 characters the entire tournament. He was leader a lot, just like me, and many, many times his fighter picks went Sherlock first pick, Bigfoot third pick, and Little Red fifth pick. And Sherlock would, of course, absorb the ban. So he would play as Little Red and Bigfoot a lot. So right away, the thought before this match was I going to steal Little Red from him and make him play someone he had basically almost never played before? So I think he won the die roll, and he chose me to be leader. So I wasn't really comfortable taking Little Red first as leader. So I picked Sherlock first, and of course Pom, because he had to at this point, picks Little Red. So I'm going to try to punish him a little bit for this. So I'm going to take Medusa with my second pick. Now, I didn't take Bigfoot from him, even though I knew he wanted to play him, because I just felt that I was probably a little bit more comfortable playing Medusa, and having both Sherlock and Medusa is really good because I think they're two of the strongest heroes in the game, and when only one of them gets banned, it's kind of hard for your opponent. So of course Pom took Bigfoot next because he definitely didn't want to let me have it, and that's one of his comfort picks. So I picked Sinbad with my last pick because Sinbad is really good against Little Red. I remember in round 4, I played against Josh Tan, and he picked both Little Red and Beowulf, and I picked Sinbad last, and Josh banned Sinbad. And someone in the comments of that video asked, well, why did he ban Sinbad? And I remember explaining there why Sinbad is pretty good against Little Red. So if you are unfamiliar with that, I'm not going to get into it again. You can go to my round 4 match against Josh Tan and just look in the comment section. So now Pom, for his last pick, is a little out of luck because he really doesn't have that much experience with any other fighters. He's played Muldoon, I think, in 2 games in the tournament, and that's basically it. He's really a Little Red Bigfoot guy. So he picked Dracula, I think because he prepped a little bit for him before our match. So for the bans, he banned Sherlock, obviously, because he's probably the best hero in the game, and I banned his Bigfoot because I wasn't going to let him play both Little Red and Bigfoot. I wanted him to play at least one relatively new hero for him, and I wasn't going to ban Little Red because I had Sinbad. So it was Medusa and Sinbad versus Little Red and Dracula. For maps, I banned Sarpedon because Little Red can do the thing on Sarpedon if she gets map pick and starting position pick, and that's really bad against Medusa. And if you aren't aware what the thing is, it is a secret, not so secret, I don't want to call it like a tech or something, but basically if you're Little Red going first on Sarpedon, you can maneuver into the pink zone and then never leave the path, and that will literally kill all of your opponent's sidekicks. It's probably in a game somewhere, and I think To the Tabletop is making a video like just explaining what the thing is, so when that is released, it'll be in the description of this video if you want to go check that out. So I banned Sarpedon because my opponent had Little Red. Now he bans Marmorial, probably because Medusa can be a pain in the butt on that map. So yes, relatively understandable bans. So let's get into the games. For the blind pick, I picked Sinbad because Sinbad is pretty bad against Dracula. Like horrible against Dracula, but really good against Little Red, and I didn't want his Little Red to potentially beat my Medusa first game because then I would be kind of screwed. So I kind of needed to pick Sinbad first, and even if my opponent played Dracula, I would just absorb the loss and then I would get my matchup with Sinbad against Little Red eventually. So I picked Sinbad, and he picked Little Red. He also had map pick, so he picked Sherwood. Sherwood is pretty good because the Huntsman is ranged, and Sherwood has no one color zone spaces that meet up, meaning that every like zone transition, like when the brown zone goes into the green zone, there's always a multi-zone space in between them. So there's literally no spaces on the map that, I'm explaining this horribly, but basically it's really good for ranged fighters, and the Huntsman is ranged, so that's good. Yeah, it's a pretty good map for him. So this game, by the way, my semifinals were actually streamed by To the Tabletop, so I will put a link to that video in the description because it's posted on YouTube already. You could have watched it, and so that's the reason why I'm not going to show any gameplay, because the video exists elsewhere. So if you're really that curious, you want a little bit more than my summary will provide, just go watch that video. Yeah, because I don't want to edit. This game basically went how I'm assuming most Sinbad Little Red games go, where I killed the Huntsman very early, making use of momentous shifts hitting over his 2 value defenses. And once you kill the Huntsman, it's pretty over because Red loses access to her healings and big attacks and Long Have I Sought You, and I just made use of the fact that she didn't really have any cancels and just won the game in pretty standard fashion. Yeah, this is a pretty good matchup for Sinbad. So for game 2, I had to play as Medusa, and my opponent had map pick and starting position choice, and I guess a blind fighter pick. But they could basically pick either fighter in coordination with the map and starting position that they wanted. So Pom picked Little Red here, probably because he's more comfortable with her and didn't want to pick Dracula because he doesn't really have mastery of him and then lose, because then just the match is over. He wants to get his win with the fighter that he knows he can get his win with. Now, this matchup is interesting because in the tourney win rate spreadsheet, Medusa just absolutely slams Little Red. I think it's like a 17% win rate for Little Red in this matchup. But on the more casual spreadsheet, it's actually like 72% Little Red favored. So I think Little Red is actually favored in this matchup, especially because Never Leave the Path is really good against the Harpies. But it's hard to tell because when Medusa is played at a very high level, she just gets wins because she's really, really good. So this was going to be a very interesting matchup. Now, Pom picked Baskerville. I'm not sure if it's because of the zoning or just the shenanigans you can pull off with the secret passages, or how you can just tuck the huntsman in the top right corner in that tan zone where there's only one way to get to that secret passage and just block him off with Little Red. That'll be annoying because my Harpies can't get to the huntsman, but I guess Medusa could still hit over him with range. But it's just a nice spot to tuck a character you don't want to die. So this match was actually very close. Very close. I ended up killing the huntsman relatively early again, just because you always want to kill him right away against Little Red. You always want to kill him. You don't want to leave him alive. You don't want to let Little Red get the healing off. But I think during the mid game, I was a little bit too loose with my attacks and blocks. Like, I think I just attacked with regroup when I shouldn't have, and I just drew too many cards. So I think I was like 4 to 6 cards ahead of him in my deck. So when my deck ran out, I was kind of screwed because Pom didn't have any reason to come attack me, and eventually he just killed me. I think he had 1 health left, so this match was very, very close, but he actually took it. So we were going to game 3. It was going to be Medusa versus Dracula, and because I lost the previous game, I had map pick and starting position choice. So I picked Yukon because Yukon is really good for ranged characters. That just central corridor with the yellowish spaces and all the multi-zone spaces, it can just be a nightmare. And especially with my ability to deal 1 damage at the start of my turn to any opposing fighter in my zone, it was going to be relatively favorable for me. That's not actually what ended up happening, because even though my opponent made a huge mistake, and on my second turn I attacked him with Medusa and he didn't defend. So I had a Gaze of Stone in hand. I didn't play it. Of course, in hindsight, I was like, oh, I should have played that, because that basically just would have ended the game. But Dracula took an undefended second shot on the second turn of the game, and I didn't boost it all the way up to a 7. I hit him for 6 because I didn't use the Gaze of Stone I had, because I was like, oh, maybe he just doesn't have any block cards in his hand, and he didn't think I was going to attack him. So after I dealt 6 damage to him, I attacked with a Gaze of Stone, and of course he blocked that. So it was just a very, very curious play from him to not take that, especially because it's Medusa, who basically you have to block everything from her. Otherwise, you could just lose the game like he could have. So right away from the second turn, I had 16 health and he had 6 health. So it should have been a relatively easy game, but what ended up happening was he ran to not the death loop side of the map, the other darker, like dark green, dark brown, that little like side area where there's like a double loop kind of. And he just kind of hid there, because the only way I could hit him with my range, because of his really good positioning, was if I went right next to him, and I did not want to let him use his ability or just get free attacks in. And what happened in the mid game was that I drew all 3 of my feints. I drew 2 hiss and slithers, and I drew a gaze of stone. So I just like didn't really have anything to attack with. Regardless of if I attacked him, he's probably going to pull out a feint with do my bidding. So it's kind of bad that I drew them all at the same time. But I didn't have things like snipe or dash or second shot that would actually be good attacks against him. So I kind of stalled out in the middle of the game. I couldn't really apply that much pressure to him, and then he was able to heal his health back up. He used his baptisms, his prey upon, so he, I think, over the course of the entire game, had like 19 health, which was really good for him because it meant I couldn't just delete his relatively low amount of health. It was a really close game because, once again, I wasn't really good at managing my deck in either of these games as Medusas, and I ran out of cards before my opponent. I don't think Dracula used his ability that often, but he did not get either beast form off, and what ended up happening was he had 3 health, and I had a momentary glance still in my hand. So if he ever attacked me, didn't kill me, and ended his turn next to me, I could basically kill him with my ability and the momentary glance. And it got to the point where he had taken enough damage, and there was only 1 card in his deck where I just maneuvered away from him twice on my turn, and I was 7 spaces away from him. And the largest thing he could boost with was a beast form to move 6 spaces. So he had 1 card left in his deck, and the only thing he could do on his turn was double maneuver, and that's how I killed him. And I had 1 health left. So this was a very, very close match. I very easily could have lost this, especially because I did not play particularly well with Medusa in either game, although in this game I got a little bit more unlucky with the way that my deck was lined up. But yeah, Pom played really, really well, especially for being a new player. I was actually very surprised at just how close the margins were for each of these games. He will definitely be a top contender, a pretty regular top contender in future tournaments, especially because he'll have more experience with more fighters. He made top 8 playing as 2 characters like the whole time, which is just crazy to me. So Pom, hats off to you. So this means with my quarterfinal win, I made the semifinals, which is top 4, which is really amazing. I was so happy to make it because that meant I had my game streamed. So hopefully, if you're watching this, you watched the stream games on Saturday. I played at 9 a.m. Central Time, which was really early in the morning. I did not get a lot of sleep that night before because I was so nervous and the anticipation was killing me. And I had to get up early to drive my mom to the airport. So not a lot of sleep. And it was actually something that I think was a little not great, was that I didn't really get a lot of chance to prepare for my matchup. Normally, I like planning out a bunch of scenarios and researching my opponent, scouting my opponent, figuring out what they like to play and like what characters I should have ready to go against them in the draft. And because my match against Pom we finished at like 7 p.m. the night before, I really didn't have a lot of time. And even though I had already played Josh in round 4, I felt like I needed to prepare, especially because this was a pretty big match. So what happened in that? I won the die roll to choose to be leader or follower. And right away, I remember telling Josh this. I was like, damn, I really wish you won the roll because then I don't have to make the decision. And he was like, yeah, it's really easy for the person that doesn't win because you just go with what the other person gives you. So I picked leader just because I wanted to potentially just pick first, pick before him, and potentially get stronger fighters. So I picked Sherlock Holmes, first pick, pretty standard. Josh loves picking Sherlock. His 2 most picked fighters were Sherlock and Dracula. So taking Sherlock away from him, even though he's going to get banned, was still a win in my book. Now, Josh did something interesting here. He picked Bigfoot instead of Medusa. I guess he was going to pick one member of the big 3, but he picks Bigfoot. So This was a tough decision for me because the preparation I did do for this match, I kind of like looked at my notes and I was like, I don't really want to do either of these scenarios. So this was kind of my first mistake. I picked Beowulf second. Now, Beowulf is really good against Dracula, and I know Josh loves playing as Dracula. So I was kind of preemptively countering someone I knew he was probably going to pick. What I should have done here was either just taken Medusa as the other member of the big three, or just taken Dracula. I guess the reason why I didn't pick Medusa here was because my games against Pom went horribly for Medusa, and I really didn't feel confident in my abilities to play her well today, especially if Josh ended up banning Sherlock. And I figured if I picked Medusa, he was going to pick Dracula, and that matchup is like a 50-50, but Josh is a really good Dracula player, so I didn't really like the paths I was going down. I should have just picked Dracula. I don't know why I didn't. I should have brought out the thief, but I picked Beowulf to essentially stop him in his tracks, and I guess it was to do something weird, especially because Beowulf is like okay against Bigfoot. Those Grendels are really good in the matchup, but I picked Bigfoot. No, I didn't pick Bigfoot. I picked Beowulf. Now, Josh, he picks Robin Hood. This was a really good pick by him because the Beowulf-Robin Hood matchup is pretty even. Beowulf probably is slightly favored, but Robin Hood just has a bunch of attacks, and Beowulf doesn't have a lot of blocks, so it could go either way. And Robin Hood is also someone that Josh felt pretty comfortable with. This was my second mistake so far. I picked Muldoon third. I guess I was going for almost like a full counter of Bigfoot because if you play Muldoon well, that's the caveat, you can beat Bigfoot, and Sherlock beats Bigfoot, and Beowulf can beat Bigfoot. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to ban one of his other fighters and just play Bigfoot. And my opponent play against Bigfoot, that's what I meant. And Josh then, for his third pick, picks Medusa. Medusa is really good against InGen, and it's just the other member of the big three. So this was a really smart pick by him. So one reason why I made a mistake here was because something that I talked about earlier is that I felt comfortable picking a wide variety of fighters. I had not picked either Beowulf or Muldoon before in the tournament. And that was kind of what got me because I wasn't really prepared to play either of them, and just Josh picked much better than I normally I say that if you draft well, you can just win the match because your picks are better. I did not pick well, so I put myself at a really big disadvantage here. So for the bans, Josh did the obvious ban of Sherlock, and because I was preparing to go against Bigfoot, I banned Medusa. Now, I remember in the post-game interview, Zero asked me, like, why didn't I pick Little Red or someone that I was much more well-versed in? And I said, because I didn't want him to pick Sinbad last, so I would end up banning Sinbad, and that would just feel bad. That was just such a stupid response because I ended up banning his last pick anyway, and so it didn't matter like who he picked. He could have banned Spike. He could have picked Spike, and if I banned him, like, it's the same thing because he still has Bigfoot and Robin Hood. So I just should not have picked Muldoon here, especially because I'm not a great Muldoon player, and I thought the matchup against... Okay, we'll get to that later. So I have Beowulf and Muldoon, two characters that I've never played before in the tournament, and Josh had Bigfoot and Robin Hood from the same set. How funny. I think I've had that lineup. I think it's my second round matchup against Sidious. So for the maps, I banned Soho. I really didn't even think about this just because I didn't want to play against Robin Hood on Soho, especially for Beowulf. That would have been a nightmare. And Josh banned Baskerville, I guess because he just didn't want any shenanigans, and especially, like I said before, you can hide a character you don't want to die in the top right corner and then body block, and that's really good for Beowulf and Wiglaf because you can put Beowulf on the secret passage and Wiglaf on the space next to it, and then your opponent if they're melee, have to kill Wiggloff to get through that. So that could have been pretty good for me, so Josh decided to ban it. Another reason why I shouldn't have picked InGen is because Josh already had Robin Hood on his lineup, and Robin Hood isn't really a hard counter to InGen, but he's good against InGen. I've beaten InGen with Robin Hood before this tournament. So I like picked into the counter. It was a mess. So for game 1, the blind pick, I decided to play as Beowulf, and my opponent picked Robin Hood. He also had map pick and starting position choice because he was the follower, so he picked Sherwood, which, like I mentioned before in the video, is really good for ranged fighters, especially in this matchup because there's nowhere on the board that I can hit him with a melee attack that he can't immediately like fire back on me. Especially if I kill an outlaw, but Robin Hood is in the same zone, he can fire at me. It's tough. So this game was streamed. I'll put the link in the description below. You should go watch it. It was actually it wasn't too bad for me. My positioning was really good, at least for the first half of this game, and I ended up taking an undefended disarming shot onto Wiggy. So Robin Hood drew 4 cards. I was consistently like 6 cards behind him in deck count, meaning my opponent had drawn 6 more cards than me. So I was planning for the fatigue game, but I went about it too wrong. I kind of just like avoided drawing cards at all cost when I should have been using Fatal Struggles to kill outlaws because it's a guaranteed kill, and it could help me at least like match his card draw because I knew he was still going to draw more cards with piercing shots and regroups and snarks and things like that. So I was too conservative with the amount of cards I was drawing, and Robin Hood is very aggressive. I think he is the second most attack cards in the entire game behind the Raptors, and Beowulf has the second worst. I'm trying to think of the phrasing. The second lowest amount of block cards in the entire game. Coincidentally, the lowest amount of block cards in the game belongs to the Raptors. So the Raptors are at both ends of the spectrum, and Robin Hood is right behind them in terms of aggression, and Beowulf is right behind them in terms of blocks. So Beowulf only has 12 cards to block with. Robin Hood has a bunch of cards to attack with. So Josh's plan was to just attack me constantly all game and run me out of things to block with. So that happened. He killed me because I ran out of things to block with, and you could just kill me when he knows I don't have any block cards in my hand. The mistake I made, because I was playing pretty well for the first half, the one critical turn was when Josh attacked me with 2 regroups, and I blocked one with a War King and one with an equal of Grendel. I should have been way more conservative with the amount of block cards I was using, but I guess in my head, I was like, oh, I don't want him to sneak in a Hunter's Eye, because then that might be game if I don't block it. But Josh was just going to throw out baits constantly, and with 20/20 vision in hindsight, it's pretty easy to see that he was going to hold on to those until he knew he could just deal 5 damage for me without a block. And if I had just taken both of those, it would have been 2 health, and he would have drawn 4 cards, which I think that would have been game. But of course, that's really easy for me to say in hindsight. Josh played really well, and I should have just been a little bit more conservative with the amount of block cards I played. This matchup can honestly go either way, but kudos to Josh for playing it really well. So for game 2, I picked Muldoon to go against Bigfoot because I figured that I would want map pick with Muldoon because Beowulf into Bigfoot, all the characters are melee, so maps don't really matter that much, and like Baskerville was already banned. So I picked Muldoon to go on Marmorial. Now, I probably should have picked a more favorable map for this for InGen, because he's probably better on Yukon or even Raptor Paddock. But I picked Marmorial because I have played this matchup on this map. I played it like 4 days before this. And I guess I wanted to stick to what I was familiar with instead of picking something new, which is very ironic because I picked new heroes in this draft when I should have just stuck with what I know. Now, I was in for a rude awakening because everyone's always telling, or I guess like not telling me, but it is known that Muldoon is good against Bigfoot. I think what I took for granted was you have to be a good Muldoon player to be able to win this matchup, because Bigfoot, with his 3 larger than lifes, the only thing that the highest value Muldoon has on defense is a 4. So the larger than lifes are a guaranteed 2 damage. You also have 3 jackalope horns, which if you hit all of them is like 6 damage total. So that's 12 damage for Bigfoot right off the bat. You just have to find 2 more damage, and then Muldoon's dead because he only has 14 health. So the matchup actually is very close, and I think it's only Muldoon favored if the person knows exactly what they're doing and is a very skilled Muldoon player. Now, I don't really play Muldoon that much because I think he's boring, and this is gonna sound stupid, but I don't like the way his deck fits together. That's a very abstract concept, but just when I'm playing him, something in the back of my mind is just this deck doesn't really feel like it's as synergistic as other decks. You draw too many cards and it's out of your control because of the traps, and just if you had a different card instead of regroup, I think it would be better. And I don't know, I don't like playing as Muldoon, so I don't know why I picked him, especially into this matchup where it's actually Bigfoot favored if the Muldoon is bad like me. I probably shouldn't have picked Marmorial either because there are better maps. So, the way I play Muldoon on this map is I like putting down traps at the different choke points, because Marmorial has a lot of one space wide passages besides that big garden in the middle. Everything around that is basically a one space wide passage. So I put down a lot of traps around those and just constantly move in and out of safe areas where Bigfoot can't really reach me. The problem is, for one, they should all be destroyed. Will never actually do that much damage because you're not clumping your traps together. But I guess I just don't like doing that, because when you and your opponent are on another side of the map, your traps are just doing nothing. And 2, Marmorial has just a lot of different ways to access each part of the map, so you can never really close yourself off from Bigfoot, especially if you're down a couple of workers, which is exactly what happened. I'm referred to as, well, for one, the thief, and also the gambler. Josh knows. I remember it coming up in commentary at least once that he's played against Zero a lot. So that was the finals, by the way, Josh versus Zero. And Zero does not gamble at all. Whereas someone like me, I like taking some risks. Sometimes it really pays out, and sometimes it backfires. So early in the game, I landed an attack on the Jackalope, and I got a regroup as a block. So I was like, oh, maybe he doesn't really have that much to block with in his hand right now, and if I can kill the Jackalope early, that would be really, really good for me. So the next turn, I attacked the Jackalope with a leap away. This was a mistake because, obviously it was a mistake in hindsight, but it was a risk because he could have drawn block cards on his last turn. He also just might have just had them to begin with, but I attacked him with a leap away thinking, oh, maybe he just doesn't block this, or maybe I can get 2 to 3 damage in, and that would be just really good for me. But Josh blocked with a skirmish, so I dealt no damage, and I wasted a really good block card for me. As Muldoon, blocking 4 damage, you need to block 4 damage every time Bigfoot attacks you. And my positioning was also a little messed up that turn because I think I was positioned next to a trap, and in my head I was like, oh, he can't reach me because he's not going to step on the trap. But then Bigfoot maneuvered to me, stepped on the trap, landed next to me, and hit me with a larger than life that I had to feint. So right there, it deals the extra 2 damage that he needs, and he basically won the game from that just combination of mistakes from me. I ended up getting him down to 7 health and the Jackalope at 1. I've realized this tournament that the Jackalope is so hard to kill, especially as Muldoon, because another thing I don't really like about him is that his attacks aren't high value, so if you're playing against a character like Bigfoot who has a ton of high value block cards, you just don't really deal that much damage from combat, and you have to rely on your traps chipping away at your opponent's health total. And Josh didn't use the Jackalope over traps unless he wanted to get me to draw cards at the end of the game, which he did to actually kill me. He never played his third larger than life because he killed me with fatigue damage, which was kind of funny. So that was it. I lost 2 games, and that was the match. Josh played really well. I don't want to say like, oh, I only lost because I played like doo-doo. No, Josh played both of these games really well. He deserved to go to the finals. I made mistakes, honestly, and that's what it comes down to. Yeah, I'm just like saying it out loud is a little bit harder because I've been like internalizing it the last couple of days, but I'm still very proud of getting 3rd place. I tied for 3rd place technically because I'm tied with the person that 0 beat, who was Sojourne, and that is the end of my journey for the Summer of Legends tournament. Overall, this event was just so much fun. It was such a good time to be able to play so many different people. I loved every single person I played. I've made a ton of new friends from this experience, and just getting to play Unmatched and getting to play high level Unmatched is always a blessing in my book. And I just think this tournament was very well done, and I'm so glad to have been a part of it. Whew. So like I said, all the games that I talked about today, there's videos of them somewhere else, which is why I'm not posting them and editing them. I will leave links in the description if you want to go watch them. I know the actual games from my semifinal match aren't uploaded at the time of me recording this, so they might not be available right away depending on when this video goes up and depending on when the tournament actually gets posted to YouTube. So you might have to wait a couple days. Also, I got interviewed after my match. That was actually very interesting because that's the first time I've ever had like a real interview happen. It was really fun. So I think they'll also post that. So you should just go watch that to see what I thought immediately after the match. And so you can see my face and my cactus cup. I was drinking orange strawberry banana juice out of a purple cactus shaped cup, and that's just one of my favorite things to drink out of because it's just so funny. So anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed following along my tournament journey. I got exciting news because there will be, I don't know why I'm announcing it like this, but basically I'm going to make a tier list now because I've had my first taste of competitive Unmatched, and I feel like I actually understand a lot of the current meta right now. And I'm going to make a tier list, and it's probably going to be out sometime later this week. So I know many, many of you have been waiting for that video to come out ever since the April Fool's Day video with that fake tier list. But so that'll be exciting. So stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for watching. So that's all I got for you guys today. As always, like, subscribe, and yeet!